at our website at edwatch.org. Moving on, the transformation of education. Education for a sustainable future requires a change in approach in the teaching and learning process. This brings us to number 2, and that is the idea that preparing American youth for the 21st century requires a radical departure from traditional classroom instruction. Above all, it requires a shift in long-held beliefs that the role of the teacher is to transmit knowledge to the students. Instead, teachers must view themselves as facilitators through which young people construct knowledge themselves. Now, that's a long way of saying indoctrination. But the problem is, this came out in 1989, by the way, by the Carnegie Council on Adolescent Development, and is the plan now for our education system. The research link that I use is out of our State Department of Education, who did a research on performance-based instruction called constructivism. It tells us, basically constructivism means postmodernism. There is no truth. Students construct their own understandings of reality and realize that objective reality is not knowable. So why bother? The truth is, the truth which keep men free is being suppressed in order to prop up the attitude training agenda. And it moves on. You can see this through the final subject to fall by the national standards is education. This is our new math in Minnesota called Connected Mathematics. Based on the National Center of Teachers of Mathematics, Standard 3 tells us that students learn that mathematics is man-made, that it is arbitrary, and good solutions are arrived at by consensus. No lie. There is no truth, not even in math. Most of us assume 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. You're wrong. We might reach a new consensus. Consensus is the theme that is more important in math than math. Now keep in mind, this is based on a shift in worldview. Mathematics was not a self-existing truth discovered by man and the secrets of it unlocked. It was a social construction to meet society's need. This is the shift in thinking about all of our curriculum today. They're all based on the postmodern or constructivist approach. How well does it work? Well, they tell you. In the teacher's guide in the back, it tells us that because the curriculum doesn't emphasize arithmetic computations done by hand, some students may not do as well on tests assessing computational skills. We believe such a trade-off in the favor of CMP is very much to the student's advantage in the world of work. You see, we don't want children who can think about the numbers behind the buttons. We simply want children to be prepared to know which buttons to push. That's why the new cash registers at the fast food have pictures on them, not numbers. Our children are mathematically illiterate on purpose. How do I know on purpose? Why isn't this just a basic bad idea? Because the Sustainable Development Plan tells us so. Generally, more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. In this case, more education increases the threat to sustainability. Charlotte Iserby, I owe you an apology. I did not believe for the longest time it was a deliberate dumbing down. I thought the dumbing down was a natural consequence of a bad idea. Folks, it's deliberate. It's deliberate. So UNESCO tells us, indeed, in the 21st century, the literacy of sustainable development will be as essential to comprehending the world as were, past tense, the traditional skills of reading and writing at the start of the 20th century. Folks, this is real. It's happening to our children as we sit here every day, day in and day out. Goes on to say the effectiveness must ultimately be measured by the degree to which ESD changes the attitudes and behaviors of people, both in their individual roles and in their collective responsibilities and duties as citizens. And so we see the truth of this matter in a picture that was sent to us at Maple River Education Coalition. This central school model says the aim of education is the knowledge not of facts, but of values. And in fact, we were given this at a school to work conference put on by the state of Minnesota, defining performance-based instruction, which, by the way, is just a new term for outcome-based instruction, which said that learning has not taken place until behavior has changed. It goes on to tell you that values, attitudes, and interests can be learned and taught, and they can be objectively evaluated. How do you do that? Unless somebody knows the outcome attitudes that are desired? Well, the way we measure that is through something called an assessment. Has anybody heard of the term assessments? You ever wonder why they changed to that term instead of test? You see, the thing is, test is a measure of objective knowledge. What do we assess? We assess our houses for its value. We assess our cars for its value. Folks, we are now assessing our children based on their value, perceived value to society, based on how well they now demonstrate that they think like a globalist. That's the meaning of assessment. That's what we're doing to our children. Now, No Child Left Behind made it a federal offense for me to show you the NAEP test, so I can't do that anymore. But what I will show you is the results from this National Center for Education Statistics document that assessed the percentage of children who now believe it's government's responsibility to take on economic concerns. Keeping prices under control. 84.2% of America's ninth graders now believe it's government's responsibility to set prices. The curriculum is working. Providing industries with the support they need to grow. Supporting business. 66.2%. The curriculum is working. Guaranteeing a job for anyone who wants one. Government's responsibility. The curriculum is working. And finally, reducing differences in income and wealth among people. 63.5% of ninth graders, tomorrow's citizens, voters, and government officials now believe it is government's responsibility to redistribute wealth. The curriculum is working. It tells us that the assessments were not designed to measure knowledge of a particular country's government, but were developed instead to measure knowledge and understanding of key principles that are universal across democracies. Are these the key principles of democracy? I think not. Not the American version of a republic, by the way. Read Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. Guaranteeing a republican form of government, not a democracy. John Adams called democracy the devil's very own form of government because he said the most famous democratic vote in all of history was crucify Christ. And the government even knew he was innocent. That's democracy. That's why our founders were afraid of it. Who was the first man to call for worldwide democracy? Karl Marx. Did you know that? Well, how could kids think this way? Look at the national standards of economic curriculum. By the way, the voluntary mandatory national standards. Standard 16 says, students will understand that there is an economic role for government to play. Governments often define and protect property rights. Ooh, there's a tricky one. See, they got the word protect in there, but who defines the property rights? Government. If government defines property rights, there is no such thing as private property. Most government policies also redistribute income. This is true, but it's supposed to be a good thing here. Who wrote these standards? Well, the National Council on Economic Education and the Economics International program. These were to be based on a consensus process. Well, again, how can ninth graders be so easily convinced? You know, a famous man named Lenin once said, take away a people's heritage and they're easily persuaded. Easily persuaded. So the very first subject that fell was history. The National History Standards tells us one of the most common problems is the compulsion students feel to find the one right answer. Or worse yet, they rush to closure, reporting back a self-evident truth